Hi everyone. This is not just a story, it is a reckoning wrapped in silk, calm and sharpened truth. In the next few moments, you will witness how silence can be louder than champagne, how patience can outmaneuver betrayal, and how a woman who was underestimated learned to move like a shadow with a crown already secured. Before the year turned, before the glasses rose, before the applause echoed, a decision had already been sealed. If stories where Black women rise, reclaim power, and rewrite endings speak to your spirit, take a second to like, subscribe, and stay connected. Welcome to Black Queen Dominion, where survival turns into strategy and pain transforms into ownership. The final day of the year arrived without drama, without storms, without warning. The house was dressed in borrowed celebration, decorated for a future that was never meant to include her. Soft gold lights glowed against the walls, casting warmth that did not exist beneath the surface. The kitchen smelled of citrus and expensive champagne, the kind purchased to impress people who never noticed the labor behind the shine. She moved through those rooms with measured grace, every step intentional, every breath controlled, because this was not a day for emotion. This was a day for execution. 4 months, she had lived in the quiet tension of being married to a man who believed his confidence was power and his ambition excused cruelty. He mistook her patience for weakness, her silence for ignorance, her loyalty for permission. He had already emotionally left the marriage long before he announced his so-called new beginning. The signs were everywhere. Late nights, sudden secrets, conversations that no longer included her, plans that excluded her presence but benefited from her support. He was preparing to rise on a ladder built from her back, and he never questioned whether she would step away once she realized it. But she had realized everything. The decision did not come from rage. It came from clarity. Somewhere between the small dismissals and the loud humiliations, she understood that staying would cost her more than leaving ever could. She studied quietly. She gathered information the way others gathered resentment. She documented, calculated, protected herself financially, legally, and emotionally. While he practiced speeches about his future, she prepared the paperwork that would end the illusion he depended on. That morning, before the city fully woke, she dressed in neutral colors, the kind that did not attract attention. She left the house early under the excuse of errands related to the evening's celebration. No suspicion followed her out the door. He never noticed the weight of her absence, only the convenience of her compliance. The courthouse was calm, almost reverent. The air inside carried the stillness of endings being processed quietly, without applause or witnesses. She signed her name with a steady hand. There was no shaking, no second-guessing. Just a deep inhale followed by release. The papers were filed exactly 1 hour before he would later raise his glass and announce his freedom to people who never knew the full story. In that hour, everything changed. The marriage that had drained her was officially set on a path toward dissolution. The future he believed he controlled now had rules he did not write. When she returned home, the house buzzed with preparation. He was already in performance mode, energized by the attention he expected. He spoke loudly, moved confidently, unaware that the foundation beneath his certainty had already shifted. She watched him from across the room with a calm that unsettled even her. There was no need to confront, no need to explain. She had learned that truth does not require permission to exist. As night approached, guests arrived dressed in optimism and envy. They complimented the house she helped pay for, the lifestyle she helped maintain, the man they believed was stepping into greatness. She smiled politely, playing her role flawlessly. The strength of a Black woman often lies not in loud resistance, but in knowing exactly when to let others underestimate her resolve. The countdown began. Music filled the room. Glasses were poured. He stood tall, lifted by admiration, speaking about endings and beginnings as if he were the author of time itself. He toasted to his new chapter, his fresh start, his inevitable rise. He never once looked at her while doing it. He did not need her gaze to validate him anymore, or so he thought. She felt no anger as the clock struck midnight. Only relief. Because while they celebrated the illusion of his freedom, the reality was already moving through the system. By sunrise, envelopes would be stamped. Notices would be delivered. Consequences would begin their quiet march. The year turned, and with it the balance of power. She stepped outside briefly, letting the cold air ground her. Fireworks painted the sky with temporary brilliance, loud and fleeting, much like his confidence. She knew something he did not. Endings do not always announce themselves with sound. Sometimes they arrive silently, dressed in paperwork and resolve. As she re-entered the house, the celebration roared on, unaware that the story had already shifted direction. She looked around one last time, not with regret but with recognition. This was the final moment before truth caught up with performance. And as the night stretched toward morning, the first chapter of her liberation closed quietly, preparing the ground for what would come next. Morning arrived without ceremony, slipping into the world the way consequences often do. The house, once loud with laughter and empty promises, now sat in the hush of aftermath. Streamers sagged, glasses stood abandoned, and the smell of champagne lingered like a memory that refused to leave. The man who had toasted to his new beginning slept deeply, unaware that the ground beneath him had already shifted while he dreamed of applause. She woke early not from anxiety but from habit. Years of carrying emotional weight had trained her body to rise before chaos. She moved through the kitchen with a calm precision, cleaning nothing, touching little, simply observing. The space no longer felt like home. It felt like a chapter she had already finished reading. The light through the windows revealed every detail clearly, and clarity was something she had earned. Her phone vibrated softly. Confirmation had arrived. The filing was complete, the process officially in motion. There was no surge of triumph, no urge to celebrate. Only validation. She had trusted herself, and that trust had carried her here. The system was slow, but it was real. And it was now involved in a story he believed was still under his control. When he finally woke, the confidence from the night before still clung to him like cologne. He moved around the house as if nothing had changed, unaware that the silence was heavier than usual. He noticed her presence only in passing, offering nothing more than casual acknowledgement. He still believed he was ahead of the narrative, still believed the future was something he alone could announce. The mail arrived mid-morning. A plain envelope among glossy cards and forgotten invitations. No music accompanied its arrival. No countdown marked its importance. Yet it carried more truth than every toast from the night before. When he opened it, the air in the room changed. The confidence drained slowly, replaced by confusion, then disbelief, then the quiet panic of a man realizing the story had moved without him. She did not watch him read it. He did not need to. She focused instead on herself, on the subtle shift inside her chest where fear once lived. The marriage had taught her many lessons, but the most important was this. Power does not announce itself. It simply acts. While he had been busy preparing a public exit from a union he thought he dominated, she had prepared a private one that protected her future. The realization hit him in waves. The timing. The precision. The unmistakable truth that she had moved first. His new beginning had collided with her ending, and endings written by women who have endured in silence tend to be thorough. The house that once felt like a stage now felt like a courtroom, and he was unprepared for the verdict. She gathered her essentials calmly. Not because she was running but because she was ready. Every document was already organized. Every account reviewed. Every option considered. She had loved once with honesty and now she left with wisdom. There was no need to rush. The pace of her movement contrasted sharply with the storm forming behind her. What he felt was not just shock. It was the unfamiliar sensation of losing control of a narrative he believed belonged to him. He had expected tears, confrontation, pleading. Instead he was met with composure, the kind that cannot be manipulated or reversed. The kind that signals finality. She stepped outside again, not to escape but to breathe freely. The morning sun felt different when it was not filtered through obligation. For the first time in years her future was not being negotiated. It was being claimed. Instead he paced. Outside she grounded herself. Two separate realities unfolding under the same sky. She understood then that revenge was never about destruction. It was about survival elevated to sovereignty. She did not need to raise her voice, expose secrets, or demand acknowledgement. The paperwork spoke clearly enough. The system would do the explaining. All she had to do was continue forward. As she drove away later that day, the house grew smaller in the mirror. Not because it lost value but because it lost relevance. The year had turned and with it so had her life. What lay ahead was unknown but it was hers alone. And somewhere behind her, a man sat with the consequences of mistaking a black woman's patience for permission. The days that followed did not rush her. They unfolded deliberately as if time itself had decided to move at her pace. While the legal process quietly advanced in the background, she focused on something far more important than reacting to the shock she had caused. She focused on rebuilding herself without apology. The world often expects women, especially Black women, to crumble loudly when relationships end, to explain themselves to justify survival. She chose another path entirely. She relocated temporarily, not out of loss but strategy. The space she entered was smaller, quieter, and unmistakably hers. Every object inside it had purpose. There were no memories demanding emotional labor, no corners holding unresolved tension. For the first time in years, her mornings began without the weight of someone else's expectations pressing against her chest. She woke with intention, grounded in the knowledge that she had acted in her own best interest. Meanwhile, the ripple effects of her decision began to surface. Friends who had admired the marriage from the outside started asking questions. Colleagues noticed her renewed focus, her sharpened presence. There was a subtle shift in how people looked at her. Not pity, respect. The kind that comes when someone realizes you were never as fragile as they assumed. He, on the other hand, struggled to manage the narrative he once believed he owned. The confidence that fueled his public persona began to crack. His carefully constructed image relied on stability he no longer possessed. The new beginning he had toasted to now felt premature, even foolish. Invitations slowed. Support thinned. People who once applauded his ambition grew cautious, sensing imbalance. She did not celebrate this. She observed it. Power, she learned, feels different when it is earned through restraint rather than reaction. She stayed focused on her goals, quietly reclaiming parts of herself she had postponed. She invested time in her health, her finances, her growth. Each step forward was intentional, unbroadcasted, and deeply satisfying. The legal correspondence continued to arrive. Each document reinforced what she already knew. She had protected herself well. The marriage had not only failed emotionally, it had exposed inequities she was no longer willing to accept. She had entered the union with love and left it with clarity. That clarity guided every decision now. What surprised her most was not his resistance but his disbelief. He struggled to accept that she had moved decisively without consulting him, without warning, without seeking approval. It challenged his understanding of her entirely. He had mistaken consistency for dependence, kindness for compliance. He never imagined she would choose herself so completely. As the weeks passed, her presence became lighter but stronger. She spoke less about the past and more about the future. People noticed. Opportunities emerged. Doors that once seemed closed now opened quietly, almost effortlessly. It was not luck. It was alignment. She began to understand that survival was only the first stage. The next was expansion. Her finances stabilized in ways they never had before. Without emotional drain, she saw clearly where her resources needed to go. She consulted experts, asked questions without shame, and planned long-term. The fear that once whispered in the background of her decisions had gone silent. In its place was confidence rooted in self-trust. The world did not end because she left. It adjusted. And in that adjustment she discovered something profound. The marriage had tried to shrink her, to contain her brilliance within boundaries she did not set. Without it, she expanded naturally. Her laughter returned, softer but more genuine. Her thoughts sharpened. Her dreams felt reachable again. He attempted to regain control in subtle ways, through third parties, through indirect messages, through reminders of shared history. None of it worked. She had already moved beyond the stage where emotional manipulation held power. She had grieved quietly while still inside the marriage. By the time she left, she was already free. The most powerful shift was internal. She no longer needed validation. She no longer waited to be chosen. She had chosen herself, and that choice changed how the world responded to her. By the time the first major legal milestone passed, she felt no anxiety. Only readiness. Whatever came next, she would meet it with the same composure that carried her this far. She had learned that endings are not failures when they lead to truth. They are foundations. As she stood at the edge of this new chapter, she understood that visibility was not about being seen by others. It was about seeing herself clearly for the first time. And with that clarity she stepped forward, unaware that the most decisive moment was still ahead. Control rarely disappears all at once. It erodes. It weakens quietly, slipping through fingers that once clenched it too tightly. By the time he realized he no longer had it, the damage was already done. For her, this stage of the journey was not about confrontation or triumph. It was about watching truth settle where illusion once lived. The legal process moved steadily now, no longer abstract, no longer distant. What had begun as paperwork became reality. Financial disclosures exposed imbalances he never thought would be questioned. Agreements he assumed favored him revealed how deeply she had safeguarded herself. Every line, every clause reflected foresight. She had not acted emotionally. She had acted intelligently. He struggled with this most of all. He had believed that her strength came from him, that her stability depended on the marriage, that her silence meant she lacked strategy. Now he faced a system that did not bend to confidence or charm. It responded only to facts. And the facts told a story he had underestimated. She continued living quietly, refusing to center her life around his reaction. Her days were structured, purposeful. She worked, planned, rested, and reflected. Each routine was an act of reclamation. She no longer explained her boundaries. She enforced them. The emotional labor she once performed effortlessly for others was now reserved for herself. People began to notice not just her composure but her elevation. There was something different in how she carried herself. Less urgency. More authority. The kind that comes when a woman knows she no longer needs to prove anything. Conversations shifted. She was no longer asked how she was surviving. He was asked how she was thriving. Meanwhile, his world narrowed. The separation disrupted the image he had carefully curated. Questions followed him into rooms where applause once waited. His version of events sounded less convincing as time passed, especially against her consistency. She did not contradict him publicly. She did not share details. Her silence, once again, spoke louder than any explanation ever could. What unsettled him most was her refusal to engage emotionally. He had expected resistance, anger, tears, negotiation. Instead he faced detachment. Finality. There is something deeply destabilizing about realizing the person you once influenced no longer responds to your presence at all. She understood this instinctively. Emotional withdrawal is not cruelty. It is closure. As negotiations progressed, she stood firm without hostility. She did not ask for revenge. She asked for fairness. And fairness, in this case, revealed how much she had given and how little she had received in return. The system recognized what he never fully acknowledged. This was the moment when consequences became unavoidable. Assets were divided. Responsibilities reassigned. Futures redrawn. Each outcome reinforced a simple truth. Preparation outlasts confidence. She had prepared. He had assumed. And assumption is a fragile foundation when reality arrives. Through it all, she remained steady. She did not allow bitterness to define her narrative. She did not let the past dictate her posture. She was too busy building something new. Something honest. Something aligned. There were moments, of course, when the weight of it all pressed against her. Healing is not linear. Strength does not eliminate memory. But she had learned how to hold both without losing herself. She honored what had been while refusing to return to it. The most powerful shift came when she realized she was no longer reacting to him at all. Her decisions were no longer influenced by what he might think or feel. That tether had been cut completely. Freedom, she learned, is not loud. It is peaceful. By the time the final terms approached, she felt ready in a way she never expected. Not relieved. Not victorious. Simply complete. The marriage no longer defined her past or limited her future. It had become one chapter in a much larger story. As the final paperwork prepared to close the legal chapter, she stood at the threshold of something greater than separation. She stood at the beginning of self-authorship. No longer responding to someone else's vision. No longer shrinking to fit inside someone else's ambition. The control he once believed permanent had fully slipped away, not because she fought him for it but because she outgrew the need to compete. And as the final chapter approached, she understood that the true victory was not what she gained from leaving, but what she refused to lose by staying. Sunrise arrived quietly, without spectacle, without permission. The sky softened from night into morning as if honoring the stillness she now lived inside. This was not the kind of ending that demanded celebration. It was the kind that settled deeply, confirming what had already been decided long before the ink dried. The final papers were signed. The process was complete. What once defined her no longer held any claim. She sat alone in the early light, not reflecting on what she had escaped, but acknowledging what she had become. There was a strength in her posture that had nothing to do with endurance anymore. It was authority. The kind rooted in self-trust, earned through discipline, and protected by boundaries that would never again be negotiated away. The marriage had taught her what survival looked like. The ending taught her what sovereignty required. There was no urge to look back. Closure did not require revisiting pain. It required accepting truth. And the truth was simple. She had outgrown a life that demanded her silence in exchange for stability. She had stepped into one that honored her clarity without condition. The world responded accordingly. Opportunities aligned not because she chased them, but because she was finally positioned to receive them. Her work flourished. Her voice carried weight in rooms where she was once overlooked. She no longer shrank to accommodate insecurity. She expanded naturally, unapologetically, in ways that felt inevitable rather than forced. People saw it. Some admired it. Some resented it. None of that mattered anymore. He became a distant echo, a reminder of a version of herself she no longer recognized. His new beginning faded into something quieter, less impressive, stripped of the illusion that once made it sparkle. What remained was accountability. What remained was consequence. What remained was the reality that confidence without integrity cannot sustain itself. She did not wish him harm. Indifference had replaced emotion entirely. That, she realized, was the final stage of freedom. When the past loses its ability to trigger reaction, it loses its power altogether. She invested in herself fully now. Time, energy, resources, all redirected inward and forward. She learned to enjoy stillness, to trust her instincts without second-guessing, to honor her intuition as the guide it had always been. The woman she became was not hardened by betrayal. She was sharpened by it. Her life no longer revolved around proving anything. Not resilience. Not worth. Not strength. Those truths were already established. She moved through her days with purpose and peace, aware that her presence alone carried authority. The story did not end with applause or revenge. It ended with ownership. Ownership of her time. Ownership of her future. Ownership of the narrative. The sunrise marked more than the end of a marriage. It marked the beginning of a dominion she ruled without resistance. A life built on intention rather than endurance. A future defined not by what she lost but by what she claimed. And as the day unfolded, she stepped into it fully, not as someone who survived betrayal, but as someone who transformed it into strategy, wisdom, and unshakable self-respect. This was not the story of a woman left behind. This was the story of a queen who moved first, moved quietly, and moved correctly. And in that quiet precision she secured everything he never saw coming.